Sergeant told black officer, "You don't belong here." Then dispatch called his call sign first. "Get out of my briefing room." The voice landed flat and cold across 20 folding chairs. Sergeant Dale Pruitt did not raise it. He did not need to. He had spent 19 years on the Harwick County Sheriff's Department, learning exactly how little effort contempt required. He stood at the front of the room with both hands pressed against the edge of a whiteboard, his shoulders filling the collar of a uniform that had been pressed the way uniforms were pressed when a man believed the fabric itself conferred authority. He was looking at Marcus Webb. Only at Marcus Webb. The 12 other deputies in the room were looking at their notebooks, or the floor, or the water stains on the drop ceiling, or anywhere that was not the direction of the man, standing near the back wall, in a freshly issued uniform that still held the fold lines from the packaging. Marcus Webb did not move. I said. Pruitt repeated, drawing the word out the way a man draws a finger along a dusty shelf, checking for what he already expects to find. "This room is for seasoned officers. Transfer cases wait in the hall." Marcus looked at him. Not through him, not past him, at him. The way a man looks at weather that is coming regardless. "My transfer paperwork cleared yesterday," Marcus said. "Captain Aldridge assigned me to morning shift briefings starting today." Pruitt smiled. It was the kind of smile that had nothing behind it. "Captain Aldridge isn't running this room. I am. And you don't belong here." "Yo, hold on." They really said that out loud. In front of 12 witnesses, to a man whose paperwork had been signed, stamped, and filed. Let's get into this, because what is about to happen to Dale Pruitt in this story is going to make your jaw hit the floor. Marcus Darnell Webb was born in the back bedroom of a rented house on Caldwell Street in the Eastgate neighborhood of Harwick, a city that had been quietly shrinking for 30 years as the plants closed and the people who could leave did. His mother, Rosalind Webb, worked the night dispatch window at the County Transit Authority for 22 years, 5 nights a week, taking the number 14 bus home at 6 in the morning and sleeping 4 hours before she was back on her feet to make sure Marcus had something warm before school. The kitchen in that house had a linoleum floor that lifted at the corners, and Rosalind had pressed it back down so many times with the heel of her hand that the adhesive had given up entirely, so she kept 2 jars of peanut butter on the corners of the lifted sections to hold them flat. Marcus used to move those jars to make his lunch and put them back before she woke up, because she had told him once, in a voice that was tired but not defeated, that a floor that lifted meant a house that needed tending, and they were going to tend it. His father, Raymond Webb, had been a volunteer firefighter for 11 years before a warehouse collapse on the east side took him when Marcus was 9. What Raymond left behind was not much in terms of property. There was a duffel bag that smelled like cedar, a citation plaque from the county fire marshal's office, and a leather-bound notebook with a cracked spine in which Raymond had written, in small, neat letters, every call he had ever responded to, the date, the address, the nature of the emergency, and 1 line about what he had learned. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before the collapse. It read, "The building always tells you something before it falls. You have to be listening." Marcus had read that notebook so many times that the binding had split completely, and he held it together with a rubber band, the color of faded amber. He had wanted to be a firefighter, but when the Harwick Fire Department declined his application twice without explanation, and the 3rd time a deputy he knew from the neighborhood suggested he look at law enforcement because at least they were hiring, Marcus Webb spent 14 months studying for the state certification exam at the public library on Glenmore Avenue. He studied at a table near the window because the light was better there, and the library closed the reading room at 8, and he needed every minute of natural light he could get before the fluorescents kicked on and gave him headaches. He passed the exam on his first attempt with the highest score in his cohort. He joined the Harwick County Sheriff's Department at 26 as a patrol deputy and spent the next 14 years doing his job with a precision that his supervisors noted in their reviews and then promptly failed to act on. When promotion cycles came around, he had been passed over for sergeant 3 times. Each time, the position went to someone with fewer commendations, fewer years, and fewer solved cases. Each time, the explanation was some variation of the same phrase. Not quite the right fit for this particular role at this particular time. The transfer to the North Side precinct had been his own request, not because he believed it would be different, because the commute to Eastgate was shorter, and Rosalind's knees had been giving her trouble since the fall, and Marcus had started doing her grocery runs on Sunday mornings before she was awake. What the transfer paperwork did not mention, because Marcus had never mentioned it to anyone at the department, was that for the past 6 years, quietly, without fanfare or announcement, Marcus Webb had been completing a law degree at night through the state university's online program. He had finished his coursework. He had passed the bar exam on his second attempt. He had not yet told a single person in uniform, because the bar results had come back 11 days ago, and he was still deciding what they meant. He was thinking about what they meant when Dale Pruitt told him he did not belong in the briefing room. The hall outside the briefing room had a bulletin board with a shift schedule pinned to it and a water fountain that ran lukewarm. Marcus stood next to the water fountain for 20 minutes while the briefing proceeded behind a closed door. He could hear Pruitt's voice through the wall, muffled but continuous, the way a television sounds from another room. When the door opened and the other deputies filed out, most of them looked at the floor as they passed. One of them, a deputy named Torres with a neat mustache and a thermos he carried everywhere, slowed as he passed Marcus and said, quietly, "That was wrong," and then kept walking. Because saying it quietly while keeping walking was the precise distance he was willing to travel. Marcus went to his assigned cruiser and ran his morning patrol. "Nah, real quick, I need you to understand what just happened." This man had been with this department for 14 years. 14 years. He passed the bar exam 11 days before this story starts. And they made him wait in a hallway next to a water fountain that didn't even run cold. The disrespect is one thing. What's coming is another thing entirely. The first week at the North Side precinct established the pattern quickly and without ambiguity. On Tuesday, Marcus arrived at the equipment room to check out a body camera and was told by the quartermaster, a heavyset man named Briggs, who ran the cage with the energy of a man who had decided long ago that his small authority was the only authority that mattered, that the body cameras for new transfers were processed at the end of the week. When Marcus asked which end of the week and which form he needed to complete, Briggs slid a single sheet across the counter without looking up from his phone and said, "Fill it out and leave it. Someone will get to it." Marcus looked at the form. It was a request form for office supplies. He filled it out, wrote body camera in the item field, and left it on the counter. On Wednesday, Pruitt stopped him in the parking lot between cruisers and asked him, in front of 3 deputies who were heading into the building, why his patrol report from the previous afternoon was missing a descriptor field. Marcus said he had not been informed there was an updated form. Pruitt held up the report. "This is what a 10-year-old files," he said. "I expect better from people who actually belong in this precinct." He said the last sentence looking past Marcus, not at him, as if he were addressing someone in the middle distance. 2 of the 3 deputies turned and walked into the building. The third, Torres, pressed his thermos against his lips and found something very interesting to look at in the middle distance himself. Marcus said, "I'll update the form." Pruitt said, "You'll update the form." "What?" Marcus looked at him. "I'll update the form, Sergeant." On Thursday, a complaint was filed. Marcus learned about it not from Pruitt, not from Captain Aldridge, but from a department email that arrived at 7:43 in the morning while he was eating a gas station sandwich in his cruiser. The complaint stated that Deputy Marcus Webb had, during a traffic stop on Meridian Avenue the previous afternoon, used language that was described as confrontational and unprofessional toward a member of the public. Marcus had not been assigned to Meridian Avenue the previous afternoon. His patrol log showed him on the West Loop from noon until 4. His dashcam footage, had anyone pulled it, would have confirmed this in approximately 90 seconds. The complaint had already been logged in the Internal Affairs system under Deputy M. Webb as pending review. He sat in the cruiser for a moment with the phone in his hand. He pressed his palm flat against the steering wheel. The leather was cold. He let the breath out slowly. He drove to his patrol zone and ran his shift. On Friday, during what was supposed to be a departmental use of force refresher in the 3rd floor training room, Pruitt assigned Marcus to observe rather than participate. New transfers aren't cleared for the practical component until their 30-day review, he told the room. Though this policy appeared nowhere in the department handbook, which Marcus had read in its entirety on his second day. He sat in a plastic chair against the wall while the other deputies moved through the scenarios. At one point, the trainer, a retired state trooper named Gaffney, who seemed entirely disinterested in departmental politics, looked at Marcus against the wall and started to say something. Pruitt appeared at Gaffney's elbow and said something low that Marcus could not hear. Gaffney looked at his clipboard and said nothing. The chair's legs were uneven. Marcus found himself pressing the toe of his boot against one leg to keep the chair from rocking, and he held it there for the hour and 40 minutes of the session, still and quiet, the way a man holds a breath he has learned not to let out. The following Monday, the thing that broke the pattern happened between a call about a noise ordinance violation on Clement Street and lunch. It was small. That was the thing about the way these things worked. The thing that finally cracked the wall was never dramatic on its own. It was small, and it was the 10th small thing, and the 10th small thing landed differently than the 9th. Pruitt walked into the common room where Marcus was writing a follow-up report on a wellness check from that morning. 3 other deputies were in the room. Pruitt looked at Marcus's report over his shoulder without asking, picked up the form from the desk without asking, read 3 lines, and set it back down. "You know what your problem is," Pruitt said, not as a question, in the voice he used when he wanted the other deputies to hear without appearing to perform for them. Marcus kept his eyes on the form. "Your problem is you think this job is about paperwork, about passing tests and filling in boxes. You think if you cross your T's and smile right, that makes you one of us." He paused. "It doesn't. This job is about instinct, culture. You either grew up understanding what this badge means, or you didn't. And some people," he paused again, placing the pause where the word he was not going to say would have fit perfectly. "Some people just don't have it. No matter how many forms they fill out." The 3 deputies in the room were very still. Marcus put his pen down. He picked it back up. His hand was steady. There were 4 small half-moon marks pressed into his left palm from his fingernails that would take an hour to fade, but his hand was steady. "I appreciate the feedback, Sergeant," he said. Pruitt left the room. In the far corner, Deputy Torres stared at his thermos for a long time. "Man, look, I've been watching stories like this for a long time. And I want you to pay attention to what this man just did." He picked that pen back up. That is the discipline of someone who knows exactly what they're carrying and exactly when they're going to put it down. Keep watching. What Dale Pruitt did not know, what no one at the North Side Precinct knew, was that 6 years earlier, at the same time Marcus Webb was running nighttime patrols on the west side of Harwick County, he had also been enrolled as a part-time student in the Harwick State University School of Law's distance program. He had paid for it semester by semester from his patrol deputy salary, which was not a salary that made semesters easy. He had studied criminal procedure in the front seat of his cruiser during slow overnight shifts, con law at the kitchen table of the Caldwell Street house, while Rosalind slept in the back bedroom with the fan running because she could not sleep without the fan, evidence law on his phone during lunch breaks in the parking lot of the Waffle House on Industrial Boulevard, where the Wi-Fi reached the lot if you sat near enough to the building. He had taken the bar exam twice. The first time, he missed by 9 points and drove home in silence and did not speak about it to anyone. The second time, he passed. The results came by email on a Tuesday afternoon while he was at his desk at the precinct filling out a shift change request form. He had read the email twice, then closed it, and finished the shift change form and driven to Caldwell Street after his shift to pick up Rosalind's prescription from the pharmacy on the corner. He had not told her yet. He was waiting for the right moment. He had the bar results letter printed and folded in the glove compartment of his personal vehicle. He was also waiting to hear back from a message he had sent 9 days after receiving the results to the Civil Rights Division of the State Attorney General's office. A quiet message, a professional one, about a pattern of conduct he had been documenting for 14 years. They had replied the same afternoon. 3 weeks after Marcus's arrival at the North Side Precinct, the false complaint filed under his name came up for informal review. Captain Aldridge, a trim, careful man who had run the precinct for 6 years by making sure nothing loud ever happened on his watch, called Marcus into his office on a Wednesday morning. Pruitt was also in the office. Aldridge had the complaint file open on his desk. "I've looked at this," Aldridge said, and his tone carried the particular neutrality of a man who had already decided how this was going to go and was explaining it, not discussing it. "There's an inconsistency with the patrol logs. Your GPS puts you on the West Loop. The complainant says Meridian Avenue." He paused. "The complaint is going to stay in the file as inconclusive." "Inconclusive," Marcus said. "It means it's not sustained, but it's not dismissed," Aldridge said. "Standard procedure. A complaint for something I didn't do stays in my file as inconclusive." "Deputy Webb," Pruitt said from the chair in the corner, in a tone that suggested he was doing Marcus a kindness by using his name. "This is how the process works. You'd know that if you'd been here longer." Marcus looked at Aldridge. Aldridge looked at the file. "That'll be all," Aldridge said. Marcus left the office. He sat in his cruiser for 4 minutes. He pressed the flat of his hand against the steering wheel, both hands this time, and breathed. Then he reached into the glove compartment of the personal vehicle he had driven that morning and took out his phone and sent a follow-up email. The State Attorney General's office replied within the hour. What came next did not come loudly or dramatically or with announcement. It came the way consequence tends to come when it has been building for a long time and finally reaches the structural point the wait always finds. It came on a Thursday morning, exactly 26 days after Marcus Webb had stood in the briefing room doorway while Dale Pruitt told him he did not belong. The morning shift briefing had concluded. Pruitt had run it with his usual authority, and Marcus had attended because Captain Aldridge had overridden Pruitt's hall policy. After a discreet conversation Marcus had forced by filing a formal written question about the legal basis for the exclusion, and had sat in the third row without speaking, and Pruitt had not looked at him directly once during the 40-minute session. The deputies filed out to their cruisers. Marcus was halfway to his when the precinct's main doors opened, and 2 people walked in who did not belong to the Harwick County Sheriff's Department. The first was a woman in a navy blazer over a white blouse, carrying a leather document case with a state seal embossed on the flap. She was perhaps 50, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and the particular posture of someone who spent her days in rooms where people stood when she entered. Her name was Vivian Hargrove, and she was the Deputy Director of the Civil Rights Division of the State Attorney General's office, and she had driven from the Capitol that morning. The second was a man in his late 60s in a charcoal suit, carrying nothing, who walked with the ease of someone who had long since decided that he did not need to carry things because rooms arranged themselves around him. His name was Judge Robert Calloway, and he served on the federal district bench, and his presence in any building generally prompted a quick and quiet recalibration of everyone in that building's professional posture. Behind them, from a black SUV parked at the curb, 3 more individuals emerged. 2 of them were in state investigator jackets. The third was holding a camera with a press credential on the strap. "Yo, pause. Pause right there. Did you just see what I saw?" The Deputy Director of the State Attorney General's Civil Rights Division, a federal judge, and a press credential, walking into Dale Pruitt's precinct on a Thursday morning because Marcus Webb sent an email. "Baby, this is where it starts." Vivian Hargrove asked the desk officer to please call Captain Aldridge to the front. Then she asked, with a politeness that was precise enough to be unmistakable, that Sergeant Dale Pruitt also be located and brought to the lobby. Marcus was standing near the far wall next to the duty board, having been stopped on his way out by the look on Torres's face as Torres watched the visitors come through the door. Aldridge appeared from the back hallway first, still buttoning his top button, and stopped when he saw Hargrove and the judge and the investigators in the lobby of his precinct. He stopped the way a man stops when a structure he has been managing reveals that it was already falling. "Captain Aldridge," Hargrove said pleasantly, producing a document from her case. "I'm Vivian Hargrove, Civil Rights Division. We've been in communication with one of your deputies regarding a pattern of discriminatory conduct and an improperly filed complaint. We're going to need a conference room and approximately 2 hours of your time." We've also brought a court order requiring preservation of all body camera footage, dashcam logs, GPS patrol records, and internal affairs filings for the past 14 years relevant to this department's treatment of black officers. She said 14 years the way you say a number when you want the room to understand that you are not guessing. Aldridge's mouth opened slightly. He closed it. Pruitt arrived from the side hallway 30 seconds later, still pulling his sergeant's badge into place on his chest, and stopped 4 feet into the lobby. "What's this?" he said. Judge Calloway turned and looked at him with the unhurried attention of a man who had been looking at people from the bench for decades and could read a face the way other people read menus. He did not say anything. He simply looked at Pruitt in a way that communicated, without a syllable, that Pruitt's voice was not a factor in whatever was about to happen. Hargrove said, "Sergeant Pruitt, my office has documented a pattern of conduct that includes the unauthorized exclusion of a sworn deputy from departmental briefings, the facilitation of a false complaint lodged against that deputy, and multiple verbal incidents consistent with racial harassment. We also have, courtesy of the precinct's internal recording system, audio from a briefing room on the morning of your new transfer's first day, and from the common room 14 days later. I think you know the ones I mean." Pruitt looked at the ceiling. His jaw worked. "The recording system in the common room," Hargrove continued, opening her document case again, "was upgraded 8 months ago. It records continuously. The new briefing room system was installed as part of a county security initiative 6 months ago, also continuous." She paused and let that settle. Torres, standing near the duty board with his thermos pressed against his chest, looked at Marcus for the first time all morning. Marcus was looking at the floor. His hands were at his sides. They were not trembling. He was very still, the way a man is still when he has been holding something for a long time and is just now feeling the weight begin to lift. "I'd like that conference room," Hargrove said to Aldridge. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 18 minutes behind a closed conference room door. During that time, the deputies of the Thursday morning shift stood in the parking lot in various states of quiet, and Torres refilled his thermos from the break room coffee maker twice. And the press photographer sat in the lobby and waited, and the state investigators set up a laptop and began pulling files. Marcus sat at the far end of the conference room table. Vivian Hargrove laid out the documentation in chronological order. 14 years of passed-over promotions. 3 cycles where less credentialed officers had been advanced. The false complaint and its GPS refutation. The audio recordings. A pattern analysis compiled by her office's data team over the past 3 weeks that showed black officers at the Northside Precinct were 3 times more likely to receive informal complaints and half as likely to be promoted as their white counterparts. A disparity that had persisted across 4 captains and 9 years. Judge Calloway sat at the side of the table and said nothing until Pruitt, who had been holding himself together with the effort visible in his neck, said, "I don't know what he told you, but I've been running a professional precinct for Sergeant Pruitt," the judge said, and the word sergeant carried in it a precise weight, as if the judge had picked it up and examined it for a moment before placing it down. "I would encourage you to stop talking. I'm not here in an official judicial capacity. I'm here because my office was contacted by the Attorney General's division and because I have known Marcus Webb for 6 years." He paused. "I administered the bar exam he passed 3 weeks ago, and I have been, for the past 4 years, his professor of evidence law and his faculty supervisor for the paper he published last year in the State Bar Journal on discriminatory enforcement patterns in county law enforcement. It is a paper that my office has since transmitted to the U.S. Department of Justice as supplementary reading." The room was very quiet. Pruitt looked at the table. Then he looked at Marcus. Marcus was looking at a point above Pruitt's head. His face was calm. His hands were folded in front of him on the table. He did not say anything. He did not need to. "He published a paper," Pruitt said. "He passed the bar," Hargrove said. "He is, as of 3 weeks ago, a licensed attorney in this state. He was also, when he was assigned to your precinct, the subject of a false complaint that we believe you had prior knowledge of. That is the part that concerns my office most significantly." Aldridge, who had not spoken in 40 minutes, said, very quietly, "I had no idea about the complaint." Hargrove looked at him. Your signature is on the informal review memo, Captain. Aldridge looked at his hands. The conference room door opened at 11:42 in the morning. The 11 deputies who had been finding reasons to be in or near the lobby since 10:30 watched Hargrove and the judge emerge, followed by the investigators, followed by Aldridge, and finally by Pruitt and Marcus Webb. Pruitt walked the way a man walks when the weight he has been carrying as authority has been removed and replaced with something heavier. His badge was still on his chest. It would not be there by the end of the day, Hargrove asked, with the same pleasant precision she had used all morning, whether there was a space where a brief statement could be made to the press photographer who had been waiting in the lobby. Aldridge pointed to the briefing room. Hargrove nodded. They moved to the briefing room. The same briefing room. The same whiteboard, with Pruitt's handwriting still on it from the morning session. The press photographer sat up near the door. Torres slipped in behind two other deputies and stood against the back wall. He had left his thermos in the break room. Hargrove made a brief statement to the camera. She outlined the investigation, named the Civil Rights Division, referenced the court order for records preservation, and stated that the matter had been referred to the State Ethics Commission and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Unit. She said that Deputy Marcus Webb had cooperated fully with the investigation over the past 3 weeks and that his documentation had been, in her word, exemplary. Then, she stepped back. Pruitt had been told, by the investigators before the room was assembled, that a public acknowledgement was required as part of the voluntary compliance agreement his department's lawyers had recommended he sign in the final 20 minutes of the conference. The alternative, his lawyer had explained on the phone, was a federal lawsuit in which the recorded audio would be entered as Exhibit 1. He stepped forward. He looked at the floor once, then at the camera. "I want to acknowledge," he said, in a voice that sounded like a man reading words he did not want to be reading, "that my conduct toward Deputy Webb was inappropriate, and that Deputy Webb is a committed officer." He stopped. The pause was long enough to be audible. He is determined, in his work. The room waited. No one moved. "That's all," Pruitt said, and stepped back. It was the smallest, most reluctant architecture of apology that language could construct. Determined, in his work. Marcus Webb looked at Dale Pruitt for exactly 3 seconds. Then he looked at the room, the folding chairs, the whiteboard, the bulletin board with the shift schedule, the water stains on the drop ceiling, the door that had been closed in his face 26 days ago, and he looked at all of it with the expression of a man who has been carrying a very specific piece of knowledge in a glove compartment for 3 weeks and has, finally, quietly, arrived. He said, "I appreciate the acknowledgement, Sergeant. And then, I should let you know that my resignation from the Sheriff's Department is effective as of close of business today. I've accepted a position with the Civil Rights Division." He said it the way his father had written those last words in the notebook, like a man who had been listening to what the building was telling him, and now knew exactly which way to walk out. The room stayed quiet for a beat after that. Then Torres, against the back wall, did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He started clapping, slowly. Then one deputy near the window joined, then another. Pruitt walked out of the briefing room without looking at anyone. The formal consequences took the shape that consequences take when they have been waiting behind a system for a long time and finally find the opening. Dale Pruitt was placed on administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation the same afternoon. Within 8 days, the investigation had confirmed the falsified complaint, the unauthorized briefing room exclusions, and a pattern of similar conduct spanning 7 years that had produced 3 prior complaints, all of which had been filed, reviewed, and closed under the same word, inconclusive. Those 3 complaints were reopened. The officers who had filed them were contacted. Pruitt's sergeant certification was suspended by the State Law Enforcement Standards Board pending completion of the review. His union representative issued a statement describing the situation as, quote, complicated, which was the statement, "A union issues when it has decided that the cost of defending a position exceeds the value of defending it." Captain Aldridge accepted an early retirement package 3 weeks later. The language of the package did not use the word forced, but the construction of the terms communicated clearly that the distinction was administrative rather than substantive. The informal review memo with his signature on it was included in the State Ethics Commission's open file. Briggs, the quartermaster, was reassigned to record storage in the county basement, a position that did not require him to interact with incoming deputies or determine who was and was not eligible for equipment. The department entered into a consent decree with the Civil Rights Division that required independent review of all promotion decisions for a period of 4 years, mandatory training on discriminatory enforcement patterns for all supervisory staff, and quarterly reporting on disparate impact metrics across racial lines. The consent decree cost the county $480,000 in compliance infrastructure and legal fees. The false complaint filed against Marcus Webb was expunged from every record in which it appeared. At the precinct, the briefing room door was left open for morning sessions going forward, by order of the interim captain, who had been brought in from the district office and who had a habit of arriving early and leaving late and who did not appear to care very much about anything except whether the work was done correctly. 18 months later, Marcus Webb sat at a desk on the 4th floor of the State Attorney General's building in the Capitol, in an office that had his name on a small placard beside the door. The placard said Marcus D. Webb, Assistant Director, Civil Rights Division. The view from the window was of a park that had been planted in what used to be a surface parking lot, and in the summer the trees were full enough that on a good day you could almost forget you were looking at a former parking lot. He had brought 2 things from home and put them on the desk. A small framed photograph of Rosalind, taken on the day he was sworn into the bar by Judge Calloway, in which she was wearing the blue dress she had bought for the occasion at the consignment shop on Glenmore Avenue, and was pressing both hands flat against her collarbone the way she did when she was feeling something too large to hold in. Her hands, and Raymond Webb's leather notebook, still held together by the rubber band the color of faded amber, set at the upper left corner of the desk, where it would be the first thing he saw when he sat down each morning. He was in the middle of a pattern analysis on discriminatory enforcement in 3 other county departments when his phone rang. It was Torres. Torres had been one of 2 deputies who had formally submitted testimony to the state investigator's office regarding the conduct they had witnessed at the Northside precinct. His testimony, which covered the briefing room exclusion, the common room incident, and the parking lot encounter with the falsified complaint form, he had been cited in the Ethics Commission report as among the most detailed and specific in the case file. He had been promoted to sergeant 3 months after the consent decree was signed. He called Marcus occasionally. Not often, but occasionally. He called this time to say that the new junior deputy class at the Northside precinct had graduated that week. Among the graduates were 4 black officers, which was more black officers than had joined the precinct in any single class in the previous 12 years. The interim captain, who had apparently been made permanent captain while nobody was making announcements about it, had assigned all 4 to morning briefings starting the following Monday. Marcus said that was good news. Torres said he thought Marcus should know that something had been added to the briefing room while the renovations were going on. A small plaque on the wall beside the door. He described it. Marcus listened. The plaque read, "Briefing Room, A, open to all sworn officers." There was a date on the plaque. It was the date of Marcus Webb's first morning at the Northside precinct. Marcus sat with the phone in his hand for a moment after Torres hung up. He looked at the notebook on the corner of his desk. He did not pick it up. He just looked at it. Then he turned back to his pattern analysis and kept working. 3 weeks after Marcus accepted the position at the Attorney General's office, the civil settlement between the county and the 4 officers whose prior complaints had been marked inconclusive was finalized. The total figure was $1,040,000. Marcus had declined to accept personal restitution. Instead, in coordination with Judge Calloway's chambers and the State Bar Association's Foundation Fund, he had established a scholarship in Raymond Webb's name at Harwick State University School of Law, the Raymond D. Webb Scholarship for first-generation law students. It covered full tuition and a living stipend for 1 student per year. The first recipient was a 24-year-old from the Eastgate neighborhood who had passed the law school admission test 3 times before achieving a score he was satisfied with, and who had been working night dispatch at the County Transit Authority, the same window, the same building, to pay for test prep materials. Rosalind had met the young man once, at the scholarship announcement ceremony at Harwick State, and had shaken his hand for a long time and told him something that the young man later said he kept on a note card taped to his study desk. She had said, "The door opens both ways. You walk through it and you prop it open behind you. That's the whole job." She said it in a voice that was not tired. It had not been tired for 18 months. "Okay, come here for a second. Now, this is a fictional story. But you and I both know that everything in it is true. You know it because you've seen it, or lived it, or watched someone you love absorb it with steady hands and a steady face while their insides were doing something entirely different. You know what it costs to pick the pen back up. You know what it means to carry something in a glove compartment and wait for the right moment. And you know what it looks like when a system that told someone they didn't belong suddenly has to put their name on a plaque on the wall. Here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever been in that briefing room? Have you ever stood in a hallway next to a lukewarm water fountain while someone else ran the session you were supposed to be in? And if you have, what did you do with it? Drop it in the comments below. I read everyone. If this story hit you the way I think it did, share it with someone who needs to see it today. Like the video so more people find it. Subscribe if you want more stories where justice actually shows up on time. And if you want to talk about what comes next, we're here, every week. The door opens both ways. There is a thing that happens inside institutional spaces when a man like Dale Pruitt has operated without check for long enough. The walls of that space begin to reflect him. The forms take on his logic. The procedures carry his fingerprints. The language of incident reports bends around his preferences the way a river bends around a stone that has been sitting in the same place for 19 years. Everyone in the building learns the shape of that stone. They learn to move around it. They learn that the river flows this way and not that way, and they stop asking why, because the question of why has not produced a useful answer in a very long time. Marcus Webb had known this shape for 14 years. He had been navigating it since before he was assigned to Northside. He had watched it operate across 3 precincts, under 4 captains, through 9 internal affairs cycles and 6 promotion rounds and 2 departmental restructurings. He had watched it operate with the thoroughness of a man who was not merely enduring it but studying it, because studying it was the only thing he could do that moved in the direction of change rather than away from it. He had started keeping notes in his father's style, not in Raymond's notebook that he did not write in, but in his own notebook, purchased from a drugstore on the corner of Industrial and Clement, a brown spiral bound with a soft cover that fit in the interior pocket of his patrol jacket. Every incident went into the notebook with the same structure his father had used in the leather book: date, location, nature of the incident, and 1 line about what he had learned. He had filled 4 of them over 14 years. Those notebooks, photographed and transmitted in a secure file to Vivian Hargrove's office 3 weeks before she walked through the Northside Precinct's lobby, had formed the documentary spine of the entire investigation. They were, in the parlance of the Civil Rights Division's intake team, among the cleanest and most comprehensive self-documented records of institutional racial harassment they had processed in 11 years of operation. Hargrove had told him this in their second phone call. She had said, "Deputy Webb, wherever you learn to document, I'd like to thank whoever taught you." Marcus had thought about Raymond's notebook with its cracked spine and its rubber band for a moment. Then he said, "My father kept logs of every call he ever ran as a firefighter. I grew up watching him do it." Hargrove had been quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's something." It was something. The State Bar Journal article that Judge Calloway had mentioned in the conference room, the one that his office had transmitted to the Department of Justice, had been published 8 months before Marcus transferred to Northside. Its title was Inconclusive: A Study of Differential Internal Affairs Outcomes in County Law Enforcement Agencies by Officer Race. And it had used public records requests filed across 12 county departments in the state to construct a dataset spanning 9 years. Marcus had written it on his own time, in the law school's online portal, with Judge Calloway as faculty supervisor, and had submitted it under his own name with his department listed as his affiliation, because he had decided that if the article was going to mean anything, it needed to be signed. The law school's journal editor, a third-year student named Park, who took her editorial responsibilities with the seriousness of a person who had decided early that the work mattered, had pushed the article through peer review in 6 weeks because 2 of the 3 reviewers had read the first section and emailed her independently to say it needed to be in print as soon as possible. The article had been downloaded 4,011 times in the 8 months since publication. Marcus had not known this. He had not checked. He had been running patrol shifts and studying for the bar. What he had known, and what he had kept to himself, was that 3 of the 12 departments in his dataset were divisions of the Harwick County Sheriff's Department, including Northside, including, specifically, the internal affairs files from the 7 years during which Dale Pruitt had served as the ranking sergeant. He had not gone to Northside because the commute to Eastgate was shorter. That was true, but it was not all of what was true. He had gone to Northside because Northside was where the data was densest, and where a man with a bar license and a law journal article and 4 spiral notebooks full of documented incidents and a secure line to the state attorney general's office could put everything he had learned in a room and let it speak for itself. The building, as his father had written, always tells you something before it falls. You have to be listening. Marcus Webb had been listening for a long time. The week after Pruitt's suspension was announced publicly through the County Ethics Commission's press release, something happened at the Northside precinct that was not in any report and was not documented in any file. It was a Tuesday morning. The interim captain, his name was Sergeant First Torres, who had been elevated to acting captain pending the formal appointment process because the county, in its search for an external interim candidate, he had taken one look at Torres's testimony file and then one look at Torres's service record and decided that the shortest distance between 2 points was the one already in front of them had opened the morning briefing and run it the way briefings were run when the person running them had decided that the procedure existed to serve the officers and not the other way around. Every deputy assigned to the morning shift was in the room. Torres had not made a speech about it. He had not issued a memo. He had opened the door at 0745, the way the handbook said it should be opened, and stood at the front of the room while the deputies filed in and run the briefing, and then dismissed everyone to their assignments. But before they dispersed, he had paused at the whiteboard and erased the previous session's notes, Pruitt's handwriting, which had been there since the day of the state investigator's visit, because no one had quite wanted to be the person who erased it and written one thing in its place. It was a dispatch call number, a specific one. It was the call sign that had come through on the morning of Marcus's 3rd shift at the Northside precinct, a welfare check that had turned out to be a woman in her 70s who had fallen near her back door and could not get up, and Marcus had reached her 2 minutes before the ambulance, and sat with her on the kitchen floor with her hand in his until the paramedics arrived and filed a clean report and gone back on patrol without mentioning it to anyone. The call sign was Marcus's. Torres had pulled it from the log because he remembered the morning, and he remembered what it meant, and he thought the room should start the day knowing what it meant. He had written it on the whiteboard without explanation. The deputies looked at it. Some of them knew whose it was. Some of them figured it out. None of them said anything about it. They went to their shifts. The call sign stayed on the whiteboard for 3 days before the next session overwrote it with new assignments. Torres had looked at it each morning those 3 days, standing at the front of the room, and had thought about the man who had sat in the 3rd row with his hands folded on the table in front of him while the building fell around someone else, quiet and steady, holding a pen. Rosalind Webb moved out of the Caldwell Street house 14 months after Marcus accepted the position at the Attorney General's office. Not because she had wanted to leave, she had lived in that house for 31 years, and she knew every creak in every board, and which window stuck in August and how long the hot water heater took on a cold morning. But Marcus had put a down payment on a house on the north side of Eastgate, in a block where the trees were old enough to arch over the street, and the kitchen floor was hardwood, and there was a back porch that ran the length of the house with a view of a yard deep enough for a garden. Rosalind had stood in the kitchen on the first day and pressed her foot against the hardwood floor to test its solidity. It held. She pressed it again. She looked at Marcus. "No peanut butter jars needed," she said. Marcus looked at the floor, and then at her. His mother, 71 years old, with the reading glasses she had started needing last year, and the blue dress from the bar ceremony still hanging in her closet for occasions. Standing in a kitchen that did not require tending in that particular way. Standing in a house that her son had bought. She pressed her hand flat against the counter, and then she looked out the window at the yard for a long time. When she turned back, her eyes were bright. "Your father would have liked this yard," she said. "I know," Marcus said. He put the leather notebook on the kitchen windowsill where the light was good. That was where it lived now. The Raymond D. Webb Scholarship had, by its second year, received applications from 47 students, 18 of whom were from Eastgate or neighboring districts that had historically produced low law school enrollment rates. The selection committee, which Marcus co-chaired with a representative from the State Bar Foundation and a faculty member from Harwick State's Law School, had established 3 criteria: demonstrated financial need, first-generation law school status, and a written statement explaining what the applicant believed the law was for. The statements had taken Marcus a long time to read through. He had read them on evenings after work, at the kitchen table of his own apartment in the capital, a one-bedroom near the park, with a cup of tea going cold beside him. 47 statements. Every one of them from someone who had been told, by a system, or a person, or a silence, or a door, that this space was not for them. Every one of them written by someone who had decided to apply anyway. He had marked 3 of them in the margin with a small check, which was his notation for something he wanted to return to. 2 of those 3 became finalists. One of those 2 was the young man from Eastgate who worked the night dispatch window. His statement had said, "I want to practice law because I have spent 3 years watching people call for help and waiting to find out who answers, and I want to be part of what makes the answer better." Marcus had read that sentence 4 times. He had written it on a note card and put it on his own desk at the Attorney General's office, next to Raymond's notebook. The door opens both ways. You walk through it and you prop it open behind you. That was the whole job.